Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining a Pivot and Focus Meetup. Today's Learning Lab is Adapting Business Development to the COVID Climate. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items to cover. On the right side of your screen, you will see the GoToWebinar sidebar. You can click on the orange arrow to expand or minimize the side panel. Questions are encouraged and will be addressed at the end of today's presentation, so please type your question into the question box and please click send to submit. CPSMs attending this live program will automatically receive one CEU added to their online transcript. And finally, today's program is being recorded and will be posted along with a PDF of the slides on the Pivot and Focus page within smps.org. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for a Pivot and Focus virtual meetup. Today's program will address adapting business development to the COVID climate. Our presenters are Dianne Lee and David Ackert. Dianne Lee is a tireless advocate and industry professional in the AEC marketplace. With 15+ years of experience, she has been credited for multiple billion-dollar contract awards nationally and internationally. She is a transformational leader with direct experience having represented all facets of the construction industry. David Ackert, MA, is a president of Ackert, Inc. and its subsidiaries, and is a business development mentor to thousands in the professional services sector. Over the past 2 decades, David has developed and implemented revenue acceleration programs for hundreds of firms. Welcome to the program, Dianne and David. The audience is all yours.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Good morning and good afternoon, SMPS members. Thank you so much for joining us on this webinar, Adapting Business Development to the COVID Climate. Do these pictures resonate with you? Does this bring back fond memories of our days of networking at a typical SMPS or industry event? I know it sure does for me. It's hard to believe that it was only 4 months ago that we were doing this. Being present in a room filled with hundreds of industry professionals, catching up with old friends and making new ones, sharing ideas and learning about the next upcoming RFP. And then, of course, COVID came into our day-to-day lives. And in an instant, the platform that we were so accustomed to simply went away. The landscape for business development today looks, as you know, dramatically different. Today, we are required to reinvent ourselves and reinvent how we approach business development. So, at the end of this webinar, our hope is that you will walk away with 6 key takeaways to help your firm navigate business development during this global pandemic. Why? Because business development is even more critical now than ever to maintain and even increase market share. So as Matthew mentioned in our brief introduction, my name is Dianne Lee. Thank you again for having me here today. I currently work for a firm named Kitchell. We provide construction and project management services. I am based in Los Angeles and have been in business for 15 years, specifically focused on business development and stakeholder engagement. I currently serve as an SMPS LA Board of Director and also serve as Program Chair. In addition to SMPS LA, I also serve on 2 other industry boards, the Asian American Architects and Engineers Association, as well as the Western Winter Workshop, which is a project controls and construction management organization. Last year, I served on the CMAA board. I've been very blessed in my career, having had the opportunity to pursue national as well as international work while I was at Parsons and I was stationed out of Abu Dhabi in the Middle East. My markets of focus are healthcare, education, aviation, transportation, and public agency clients. Now, before I have David introduce himself, I just wanted to mention that I was introduced to David through SMPS. He is a key sponsor and supporter of our organization. And on top of that, is an expert in the human analytics of business development, which is what drew me to him. And after several conversations, it occurred to both of us that between my knowledge of the AEC industry and my understanding of the inner workings and requirements of how we do business development, Combined with his expertise and analytics on all things relationship focused, it would make for a compelling best practices approach that would be functional and applicable for our industry. And so, as they say, the rest is history. So here we are today. David?
Thank you so much, Dianne. And thank you, SMPS, for the opportunity to speak to you all today. I won't go too much more into my background. I think Matthew and Dianne both touched on it, but just at a very high level, I've been in the business of helping professional service firms overcome their business development challenges and reach their business goals for about 20 years now. I am a SMPS sponsor. We sponsored the last conference, the last conference that we could all attend in person. Hopefully there'll be another one soon. And I also have a company that has developed technologies that assist various service professional firms in relationship management. We can touch a little bit on some of the things that we help firms do later on in today's program. But one of the things that Dianne and I specifically thought would be interesting is to reach out of the out beyond the AEC world and pull in some best practices that we are seeing to be very effective for firms in other verticals like law firms, accounting firms, consulting firms. Some of them have adapted very well to the COVID environment when it comes to business development. And many others, including many AEC firms, from what I understand, are a little bit stuck. They're not sure how to navigate this new landscape, given that in-person meetings, as Dianne said, conferences, golf games, dinners, all of those things that we sort of take for granted in terms of face-to-face interaction are off the table, or at least look very different from the way that they did. And if trends continue in the way that they have been, we are likely to be in this situation for quite some time. So adapting to this new environment is critical for the seller doers at your firm. It's critical for the business developers at your firm. And Dianne and I intend to share some tactical, concrete examples of things that you can apply in the short term to help advance that ball for yourself. We have a lot to share. We've really selected highlights and just a few concepts that you can put to work right away. And obviously, either Dianne and I would be happy to chat with you after the program to give you more information. But let's dive into the things that we've prepared to share with you today.
Thank you, David. So this presentation will cover several topics: business development while social distancing. We will be sharing results from a client survey directly related to conducting business development during these uncertain times. We will address how you can use technology to stay relevant and present, and how to continue networking virtually.
We're also going to talk about the concept of social media as a broad way to communicate to your networks, but also how to send more targeted messaging using something called the 4 reductions. We'll get into that a little bit later on. We'll share some scripts for staying connected. So often what happens is seller doers, business developers, they know they need to reconnect with people. It's difficult to connect with people when you're not organically seeing them as you used to. But what do you say? What exactly are the words that you use to stay connected? We'll give you some scripts that you can play with and adapt. We'll talk about remote networking examples, as I said, from other sectors. I think you'll find some of them to be very creative, interesting ways to make sure that you are in a back and forth with the people who are important to the growth of your firm. Managing relationship pipelines, how to make sure that those key people in your network don't fall off the radar and that you stay top of mind with them. We'll talk about community involvement. We're all going through some form of crisis right now. What can we do to help, and how might that connect to our business development objectives? We'll have a quick review of takeaways, and then we'll save Q&A to the end, but we really would love to hear from you. So as we're going through today's program, please do use the GoToWebinar interface to submit your questions. Matthew will circle back at the end of today's program and read those off so that Dianne and I can address as many as possible. So the first thing that we want to touch on here is that marketing and business development have changed, especially business development. to give you kind of a deeper dive into how those things tie together and what specifically looks unique in our current environment. Dianne has a few thoughts to share here.
Yes, and I realize that most of you are already familiar with the scope of work of a business developer. So as you know, business development can be broken up into 4 quadrants: knowledge transfer, marketing, events, and client and partner outreach. So here's an infographic to just list out the basic scope of work of what we do on a day-to-day basis. But I think the only change and the most significant change to this infographic is the events section. That, as you know, has essentially gone away for us, which is why it's even more important now to reevaluate how we conduct business development with the platforms and technologies that is available to us. Now, I work for Kitchell, and at Kitchell, we started working from home on March 9th. And after 9 weeks of doing that, and with stay-at-home mandates being extended indefinitely in the state of California, I decided to initiate a survey to my top 50 closest client relationships, because I wanted to know how my clients wanted me to do my job. So I approached clients from 5 markets and only invited key decision makers to participate in my survey. Why? Because I wanted to really hear from the individuals who are responsible for their capital budgets. And out of the 50 that I invited, I asked 5 critical questions. So here's question number 1. What is your preferred method of communication amid COVID-19? Your options were regular email and text messages, video chats, FaceTime, or a regular phone call. Now, this part of the webinar is not participatory, but I do want you to ask yourself before I share the survey, how do you think a majority of our clients responded to this question? Okay, you have your answer in mind. I'm going to quickly share my survey response. So thankfully for me, over 67% said regular email and text messages, which is great, right? Because that's how we've been doing it for a long time. But I think, what I want to point out here is that almost 60%, which is a close second, have already pivoted to video chats, which is very telling of the times. Our clients are so ahead of the game. They're already there by using technology to communicate internally and externally. Kevin, David, have anything to add to this?
No, I think that it's encouraging that many of the things that we relied on are still in play. But one of the things that I really admire about this this segment is the fact that you reached out to the decision makers to ask them what their preferences were. And something that I would encourage everyone on today's program to keep in mind, and this will be a theme that we weave throughout today's program. It's very easy for us to make assumptions that, oh, the clients, they prefer this, or they don't want to hear from us, or they're probably dealing with this or that priority. We actually have no idea. So rather than making those assumptions, I think it's really smart to get into that dialogue and find out exactly what's going on so that our responses are appropriate.
Yeah, thank you. I'm definitely, I operate based on facts and not fiction. So let's move on to question number 2. So the second question I asked them was, what is the preferred frequency of communication? And their options were once a month, once a quarter, whenever there is a need, or twice a year. And we'd like to hear from everybody. So we're going to issue a poll to all of you to see how you guys respond to this question. Well, how do you think our clients are reacting to this question?
Great. I'm going to run the poll now. You should see on your screen question: what are clients' preferred frequency of communication? Options being once a month, once a quarter, whenever there is a need, and twice a year. We'll allow for about 30 to 40 seconds for everyone to choose their answer, and we will go over the results then.
Okay.
Excellent. One of the things that I think it often happens in an environment like this one is that we start to assume that because we are overwhelmed, that our clients must also be feeling that, and that the translation of that is that they probably don't want to hear from us as much. One of the things that informs that is simply that there's less work than there was before. So, we should probably scale back. We should just give all of this some time for the dust to settle. We don't want to be a nuisance. And, maybe when all of this is behind us, we can resume our communications with our clients. That's an assumption that is easy to make, but we'll find out in a moment if clients actually are looking for that.
Yeah, and just to add to that, David, sorry, Matthew, just let me make one quick point. Just to add to that,
absolutely.
Before I share my survey results, I want to caveat this question by saying that, the 50 clients that I reached out to, over 50% of them, I've cultivated relationships with them for over 5 to 10 years. So I know them fairly well. And then the remaining of the 50%, I've probably known for 2 to 3 years, right? So when I share my survey results, hopefully they'll make a little bit more sense.
So Matthew, do we have the verdict?
We do. Here we go. We'll share those now. So we have 29% with once a month, 26% once a quarter, 45% whenever there is a need, and 1% twice a year.
That's great. And so, David, let's go ahead and share my survey results because it is so incredibly consistent, you guys, which is awesome. So thankfully for me, over 54% of my clients said, Dianne, go ahead, shoot me an email, send me a text, call me whenever there is a need. And then, there was a split between once a month and once a quarter. And there was a client who said twice a year, which is consistent with what the polling results are. And, David, I think I have an idea of who that client is. And, it's okay. I'm going to respect that. So let's move on to question 3. Okay. Would you like to receive construction industry updates that may be valuable to you, or are you just slammed with all sorts of articles and information coming from all sides? Their options were yes, no, or maybe. Again, just quickly ask yourself, how do you think our clients would respond to this question? A couple of seconds to think about it, and I'll go ahead and share my survey results. Okay. Again, thankfully for me, over 66% of my clients said, yes, Dianne, we'd love to hear from you. If you have any valuable information or real-time data to share, please go ahead and do so. There were some maybes and there were very few no's. And of course, based on this survey result, my takeaway for me is that I'm not going to e-blast every single article that comes across my desk to all of my clients, right? I'm going to ask myself the question, why would this article resonate with this client? Why would it be important and relevant for them to even read it, to even go to the link, right? So just make sure you ask yourself that question. And I think, David, you have a couple of thoughts on this as well.
Well, the key to highlight here are the words valuable to you. And we want to make sure that we're putting a little bit of thought into what would be valuable to others. Sometimes, we'll send out a general blast that we think, well, this is going to be valuable to some. And, we want to make sure everybody else at least knows that we're still here and available for work. And I think that that's often too broad a brushstroke to use in an era where suddenly communication has become much more intense and firms are sending out a lot more thought leadership. They're using LinkedIn much more aggressively. So we'll touch on this a little bit more in today's program, but really putting some thought into what does the audience want to hear is a key step prior to sending out communications.
Exactly right. And so let's move on to question number 4, which is a really fun question. It's my favorite question. What are the most valuable and significant traits required of a business developer? Please rank them in the order of most value to you. Their options were consistency, professionalism, depth of knowledge, or friendliness. And here's another poll that we'd like to issue to all of you. There are no wrong answers. We'd love to hear from everyone. So go ahead, Matthew.
And
Great,
I
we
think
will
for
launch
this
the
one,
poll now.
and I think for this one, we're asking folks to rank the one that they think is most important, right? Or you can select one or more of the following. Okay, great.
Yep. So the question we have, what are the most valuable and significant traits required of a business developer? Option 1, consistency / strong follow through. 2, maturity / professionalism. 3, depth of knowledge / value. Or 4, approachable / friendliness. And we'll allow another 15, 20 seconds to let all of the attendees answer.
Matthew, you're very generous with your time. The other webinars I've done before, when we've issued a polling question, it's like you've got 5 seconds.
Well, actually, it looks like most individuals have provided their answer, so we're going to close the poll now, and we're going to share the results. So as you can see, we have 67% choosing the consistency, 34% maturity, 72% depth of knowledge, and 49% approachable friendliness.
Yeah,
All of my immature service providers are going to be delighted to know that that's not a priority.
So let's go ahead and share, David, the survey results. So yeah, this group is once again spot on. So based on my survey results from my clients, a majority of them said depth of knowledge, value add, and consistency, strong follow through. And you know what you will see from the rest of our presentation is why these two characteristics play such a vital role in how we do business development today under this new environment. And I know that David will be elaborating on this later. Okay, so without the opportunity for in-person events like the ones pictured here, I, of course, felt compelled to ask the next question. What is your best advice for those of us in business development amid COVID-19 in lieu of in-person events? And I will share just a really quick snippet of some of the clients' responses. I received over 50 paragraphs and recommendations that I really had to cull through, but I just wanted to share these ones with you really quickly. So one client said, I would be willing to participate in a Zoom conference with a well thought out agenda. But number one on my list is to find out how demand and supply is affecting cost of construction. Another client said, try to fully understand what challenges your client is facing and work to provide insight and solutions for those issues. Understand we may not be available immediately, work may not be available immediately, but providing any services required until a contract can be issued is greatly valued and appreciated. And another client said, patience. You know, they asked for our patience. COVID-19 has not stopped our current workload and in a way created more work to accommodate the changing times. Please wait a little while longer until we have established what the new normal is. And my takeaway from this is that please continue to share real-time information and data that is applicable while being cognizant of your situation, be mindful and be respectful of your time. And so staying physically distant, but mentally connected and focused. Now, my takeaway from the client survey are three most important things that I'd like to share with you are that clients continue to seek innovative ideas and recommendations from us, the consultants, to provide valuable info and to help them drive their project initiatives. The second takeaway is that our clients have pivoted to technology. Even a large client like LA Metro, who has fought using technology like we do today, has all of a sudden had to pivot, and they acknowledge it. And clients at the end of the day want us to continue staying in touch as long as we are respectful and mindful and we don't end up being a nuisance. Okay.
Very good.
Data. Well, I'm glad, the survey paid off for me, and so I'm hoping that it'll help other people in the industry too.
Well, and I
So
also
in
think
addition,
it's interesting that I was just going to say one comment here. I think it's interesting when you ask for responses in these kinds of surveys, because this really does help you start to understand the specific preferences of the individuals. You know, it's one thing to say, oh, 48% said X, but then again, we want to make sure that we aren't now making an assumption that most people want that same X, right? It really does come down to the extent possible. Now, I recognize, you know, we have many clients and many contacts in our networks, and at some level, we do have to default to a one-to-many strategy and approach. But especially for our key targets and our key clients, those people that are going to bring in the largest contracts, we have to tailor our approach as much as we possibly can. And we can only do that if we are speaking to them and understanding what their needs are, what their preferences are.
you're absolutely right, because every client is different. Every client has different concerns, issues, needs, wants. And as a business developer, we have to customize our approach, knowing all that information. And then speaking of information, data and research conducted by Brian Williams, who is an independent analyst, consultant, and contributor to the Harvard Business Review, indicates that almost 80% of individuals who use social media tend to outsell their peers. And David's going to tell us why.
Well, as we've been saying a few times now, it's important to be able to stay front and center with your messaging, with your marketing messaging. And that really, if you look at the sales funnel, is the top half of the funnel, right? It's just about elevating awareness and making sure that people know that you're there, they understand your expertise, they're aware of how you can help. And you can use social media for that. It makes sense. It's the broad brushstroke. But then as you start moving down the funnel and you start getting more specific and more targeted with your messaging for those people who have indicated that they really would be interested in having a conversation at some point with your firm about a specific project, or in general, they fit your profile for an ideal client, that's when you have to start to get more targeted. And of course, for that, it requires email campaigns with list segmentation, where now you're saying, okay, these people should get this kind of message based on their industry, their segment, the size of their organization, or their preferences and needs. That's only going to come about if you have that client intelligence that Dianne Lee has been demonstrating for the last few minutes. Now, if you do have a formal survey campaign or a client intelligence campaign, fantastic. COVID is a great time to be relaunching those campaigns because people's preferences and needs are unique during this time. If you haven't launched some sort of formal client intelligence campaign, now is the time. And make sure that you really understand what it is where the target is, so that your aim is true. One of the things that you want to then look at after you've collected some of that information, or if you already feel like you have a pretty good sense of it, is when you're sending email communications, you want to be as high value as possible with those communications. Otherwise, you're really just spamming them, right? You don't want to just sort of say, oh, you know, here's a general announcement, and we wanted to blast this with an email. So when you're sending those specific email communications, look at it through the lens of whether or not that communication is helping the target with the 4 reductions. So the 4 reductions are risk, inefficiency, expense, and stress. In other words, if your communication is not oriented to help them reduce either the amount of risk that they might be experiencing, the amount of inefficiency that they might be experiencing, expenses, or stress, do not click send. You run the risk of appearing tone deaf, given that clients more than ever are inundated with communication from competitors, and what they're really looking for, as they've stated through several various means here, is communications that are high value. If you've got communication that is high value, you send that whenever there is a need, whenever it is appropriate. But if you are not doing that, then you're just contributing to the white noise, which is only going to intensify as economic conditions continue to be distressed, and firms are sort of, grabbing whatever attention they think they can get with generic means.
Yeah, and I just want to say, this was probably the most valuable lesson that I learned from David, were the 4 reductions. And I mean, I use it now on a day-to-day basis. Every time, you know, before I forward something onwards to a client, I ask myself these questions, thanks to David. So again, based on Brian Williams' research, he reminds us that in order for a client or an individual to really remember us, or to really remember the conversation that we had with them, there needs to be at least 5 connection or touch points, at least 5 forms of additional interactions for the relationship to be considered successful. So whether it's a one-on-one conversation at a social outing, a fundraising event, a conference dinner, a golf outing, which is probably one of my favorite activities, and now we've had to convert them to Zoom video conversations or whatever technology that you use, just remember that you have to follow up at least 5 times after the first meeting to make a positive impact.
So I want to underscore the words "at least" because it often takes more than 5. Statistically, what tends to happen, especially for seller doers who are more doers than sellers, is that they'll meet someone at an event or, you know, whatever the context is for that initial connection, and they'll send a follow-up, right? Great to meet you at such and such. If we can ever be of assistance to you on any project, you know, here's a quick reminder on what we do. Please get in touch. And then they don't follow up after that. Why? Because they make the assumption, all right, well, they know where to find me. They can always dig that email out of their, you know, trash and, let me know that there might be some RFP coming my way. And so I certainly, you know, don't want to be a pest. But what's really going on here is all of that is code for they're not sure how to continue this momentum of the regular follow-ups. They have these questions like, well, what do I say? I mean, if they don't have a project for me to work on, what is there to talk about? What if I seem too forward if I start reaching out to them repeatedly? And what if they don't have a project for me right now? You know, then it's just weird. It's awkward, right? I mean, I don't want to create awkwardness. And what if they have a negative reaction to business development calls? Then they really think poorly of me, and I've lost any hope whatsoever of ever doing business with them. So you see, this is the kind of narrative that forms so easily in the mind of someone who perhaps isn't a masterful business developer, hasn't really gotten relaxed and comfortable with the fact that really what you're doing is developing a relationship. It's like making a new friend. And so when you think about it through that lens, rather than taking the pressure of sales or business development out of the equation and thinking about it more in terms of how are you going to reinforce a social bridge here, it opens up some room to try a few different techniques. Now, we're going to share with you some ways that you can do this that are more formal, more informal, but keep in mind that especially during COVID, that narrative of, oh, I don't want to reach out, I don't want to be a bother, can be particularly elevated. Because, you know, it's so convenient when you go to an event and you run into someone who you hadn't followed up with, because that counts as a follow-up, right? It's like, oh, organic business development. We bumped into each other and then we got to revisit that conversation that we had started 6 months ago. But organic business development is off the table right now. Pretty much all we have available to us is this inorganic kind of proactive, you've got to reach out, schedule a Zoom call, or reach out with an email, schedule a phone call. It's all very much a function of you're constantly serving the ball. See, if it's organic, sometimes the ball comes back across the net to you, and then you can lob it back over and you have a nice volley going. But with inorganic business development, you're constantly just serving, and then you're serving again, and then you're serving again. And so how do you serve those balls over the net, at least 5 of them, in order to maintain that momentum and keep that top of mind status that Dianne talked about earlier? Well, in remote networking, especially if it's of a social or informal nature, you have a really unique opportunity during this quarantine period, because everyone is struggling with some degree of isolation, elevated stress, and cabin fever. I don't know about you, but for the last few months, I have been stress eating and drinking way more than I used to. And it's probably true of many of you. It's certainly true of many of the targets that you would like to do business with. So what that means is we feel very disconnected from one another because we haven't had the same forums for social interaction. And now many people have been trying, remote happy hours, virtual happy hours to try to bridge that gap. And that was pretty effective for the first 2 months, I think. But I also think that note has been played out. People are kind of tired of, all right, I'm going to sit in front of a Zoom camera and we're all going to raise a glass of wine and then what? It's done. I've done that already. I'm looking for something new now. I'm looking for new ways to connect to the people in my network. So remote networking presents opportunities for new social experiences. We're going to give you some examples of what this could look like. It makes it easier for your clients to stay in communication with you, not necessarily contingent on the next RFP. If you're waiting for the next RFP, you are going to be waiting for a long time in this current environment. And it demonstrates that you seek to be useful, given that we're all struggling with isolation. You want to be useful in the relationship, not just available to work on projects. So here are some thoughts as we start to take a closer look at how to initiate this connection, these 5 follow-ups. One is it's good to have a script, right? Especially if you're putting this in front of a seller doer who is struggling with some of those assumptions that I was sharing earlier. What if they don't want to hear from me? And what do I say? I'm not sure how to make this work. So give them something to work with rather than just a broad sort of best practice of make sure that you're staying in touch with your contacts. That's great to put on a checklist, but it's deceptively difficult to put into practice if that kind of social interaction doesn't come naturally to you. So things like this can be really useful. Giving them a script that says, this is what you say. I was just thinking about you and your team. How are you holding up during this uncertain time? Let's schedule a quick call to touch base. Now, you have sent the first part of this in an email or received the first part of this in an email 100 times already since COVID. But what's most important is the last sentence. Let's schedule a quick call to touch base. You have to convert this into that two-way communication that Dianne demonstrated earlier, where you're getting information from them. How are things going? How are you dealing with this? What someone's going to do by way of a response to an email that just says, I was thinking about you, how are you holding up? Is they're going to send you an email back that says, well, crazy busy, taking it day by day, or, thankfully we're all safe and healthy, let's see what happens, right? But it's just going to be some generic platitude, and that doesn't help you advance the relationship. It doesn't give you the information, that client intelligence you need to really understand how you can be of help in this short term and how you can start building that momentum toward a long-term project. Another example, I've been keeping an eye on developments concerning your sector or concerning a project that you were involved with, last year, or concerning something that you were interested in doing in 2020 or 2021. Let's get on a quick call today and discuss the potential implications for you. Now, you see, that's directly tied to value. It is for them specifically. It's not just, here's an industry trend, I hope you think that's relevant. That's a broad brushstroke, and it might land flat. Another example, I wanted to share this article, webinar, podcast with you. It's great. We're all sending out lots of articles and lots of thought leadership and lots of webinars. You're on this webinar because someone sent you an invitation to a general webinar. So great, that works, right? It gets you to the table. But if you really want to make this specific, again, for those key clients, those key targets who are high value, high potential, then follow it up with, let's get on a brief call to discuss its implications at your company. So it's not just, here's something that you should attend or here's something you should read. It's read this, attend this, and you and I have a bespoke conversation afterwards about how it was valuable to you and how I can help shed a little more additional insight into what you might do with that information. Again, that's a call most people will take because it is tailored to their interests and their needs. And it shows that you cared a lot more than just to include them on a mail list with 2,000 other people. Another example, the coronavirus situation continues to evolve rapidly. I'd like to schedule regular 10-minute check-in calls at no charge, that's what NC stands for, to keep you abreast of our recommendations. So, I think in this environment, that's not so aggressive. I would have said 6 months ago, wow, you want to talk to them every week for 10 minutes and there's no project on the table? That's pretty aggressive. But in this environment, everything is changing so quickly that a quick touch base with key relationships, especially those who are being impacted severely by current conditions, is absolutely a great way for you to stay top of mind and continue to help them navigate conditions that might be really stressful for them, where they're interested in an outside opinion, interested in talking to the consultants who they respect. So
And David,
you open the door with some of these comments. No, go ahead, please, Dianne.
Sorry, David. I was just going to say to that point, your 10-minute check-in, I think is really important because you can approach it that way, but inevitably that 10-minute conversation ends up being 30 minutes. And the more you get to know this individual or this potential client, then it ends up being 45 minutes and sometimes an hour. And that's always worked for me.
Yeah, and for those of you who learned about that's a whole hour that we didn't charge for. I mean, you can set parameters around this, right? Say the first 10 minutes, we're just going to have a casual conversation. If this starts to turn into something more substantive, obviously we'll start to formalize something. But you want to give a little bit away for free so that you can then get into that dynamic where they realize, wow, this is really high value and this is something that we should be investing in and serializing. And then you pivot into, by the way, I'm hosting a fun virtual social group to stay connected during COVID-19. Would you be interested in joining us for that? So you start with a business communication and you pivot into something that's going to reinforce that, that friendship, that bridge that I alluded to earlier. So here are some examples of what you might use there. Now, there's a lot on this slide. I'm going to walk through some of it. But the thing to keep in mind is that these various ideas are divided into 3 segments. You'll see over on the right. They're either family-friendly, social type activities. They're just informal for adults, or they're more formal networking concepts. And these are all coming from other professional services sectors. So these are mostly law firms, accounting firms, consulting firms that have found a lot of success with this kind of approach because it's a departure from virtual happy hour. It's more original, it's more creative, more dynamic, and it creates this opportunity to really build a meaningful relationship with the people who are most important in your network.
Yeah, David, so I'm all for the second activity on your list.
Dianne is jumping right to love of pets. Fine, let's go there. Let's start there. Anybody who knows Dianne well knows that she has a very important person that she shares her life with. And it's a furry friend. So celebrate your love of pets comes from this notion that we all, are staying at home all the time, and many of us have pets who we love. And so finding that as a commonality is a great way to connect with other people. This came out of an interaction where a partner was talking to their client, and they started hearing a lot of barking in the background. And they said, "Boy, your dog's really going at it." And the client sort of sheepishly said, yeah, the kids insisted that we get a puppy because it's COVID, and we thought this would be a good time for that. And this dog is just nonstop. And so the conversation evolved into, well, my dog loves other dogs. Like, here, let's have our dogs meet each other. And before we knew it, the kids were around the computer on both sides, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, your puppy's so cute," and the dogs were, barking at each other, and everybody was having a great time. This was an interaction that really brought those two people closer. It had their families meet each other. It had their dogs meet each other. Now, under normal circumstances, when would that have ever happened? Would you have ever said to one of your clients, "Hey, let's set up a doggy date. That'll be fun"? You never would have said that. But because of COVID, it creates this wonderful human opportunity to connect and bolster the relationship. Talent show, this came from an e-discovery firm that recognized that a lot of the kids in the various families at the firm and among their clients were, developing new skills. One of them had learned how to play their first melody on a violin. Another one had a toddler who just started to walk. So they said, well, let's have a talent show where we'll actually point the camera at the kids, and the kids will show off their latest thing. And it was a great opportunity to broaden it out to some other key clients. Everyone took a turn on Zoom. It was a lot of fun. And again, something that they really appreciated and enjoyed. Why? Because they're cooped up, they're at home. There's nothing fun to do right now. There are no special events. My least favorite question from people these days is, so what's new? Because nothing's new. My weekends feel like my weekdays. I've got no vacations coming up. It's all just one monotonous day after another. So anything that you can do to help break the monotony of the people who are important in your life, you are absolutely giving them a value add. Virtual museum, really clever idea. Basically, this came from a mom who was concerned that her kids just don't have a lot of cultural activities and new things happening right now. So what can we do to enhance that? So they picked, 10 different images from Vincent van Gogh, and everybody had a comment on what that painting meant to them. And it was just like walking through a museum together, but doing it virtually. So I won't read through all of these. You get the idea, but hopefully you're capturing a couple of creative notions here that you can take to your firm and say, you know what we should do? We should do a firm-sponsored fill in the blank, something that's a little bit of a departure from the humdrum norm.
Yeah, and David, before you move on to your next slide, I just want to add that at a professional level, I'm definitely utilizing the referral meetups. That's obviously a great way to leverage your existing relationships to build on new ones. And also at Kitchell, we are already using the speaker series where we invite a client to speak to a select group of individuals from the Kitchell team. And it's a win-win. Everybody benefits because the dialogue goes both ways, right? We hear from the client, and in turn we offer solutions. It's a very intellectual conversation. And like I said, everybody enjoys it. And after an hour, when everybody's away from it, everyone says, that was a really great conversation. We actually learned a lot from having that conversation with the client. So.
Great. So a couple of thoughts here for you as you're trying some of these ideas out. You can always ask your attendees to invite a friend or a colleague from their inner circle. It's totally appropriate to say, hey, we're having a virtual museum. Feel free to reach out to someone else who you think might be interested in participating. And in that way, you expand your network. This is such a critical concept right now. We are really limited in the way that we can expand our networks. I will pose this question to you. How many new people have you met in the last 4 to 5 months versus how many new people had you met in the 4 to 5 months prior to that? Chances are you've met very few new people in the last few months because we don't have these same forums where you can invite a friend. So encourage that sort of dynamic when you're launching one of these initiatives. And then also as regions reopen, you may even want to consider implementing some of those concepts even with some social distancing. Many of them still apply. Consider that remote networking is a new concept for most people. Some of you may have looked at that list and thought, virtual museum, that's weird. I would never do that. Or have our pets meet each other, that's stupid. Well, the fact of the matter is that remote networking is new. It's going to take us time to get a little comfortable with some of these ideas. The good news is because of platforms like GoToWebinar and Zoom, you can actually record the first one and send that to anyone who didn't take you up on your invitation so that they can see, oh, wow, the remote poker game actually looked really fun. I think I will sign up for that next time around. So in this way, you can kind of give them a little sneak preview into what they missed and maybe an opportunity to get comfortable with it without actually having to take the leap. A key concept here that we all have to be thinking about is contact management and specifically managing the pipeline of those most important relationships. Now, in our experience, this is true across professional services. I think it's certainly true in the AEC space as well. Most seller doers don't have a very clear picture of who their key clients, prospects, referral sources, and firm colleagues are. If you quiz them, they would say, oh, I think probably these people and those people, but there are plenty who fall through the cracks because it's not documented anywhere. It's not being tracked anywhere. So it's important for them to have a very clear idea of who that list is. I'm not talking about CRM where you've got everybody and their mother in that database. This is much more of a bespoke relationship pipeline that anyone who's taking business development seriously has to be managing. And while you're managing that list of names, you also want to get clear for yourself, what are each of their most pressing business needs? What are their associated projects and priorities? And what are their personal interests? Again, we don't do a great job of checking the boxes and making sure that we found out that information so that those 5 follow-ups that Dianne talked about come naturally to us. So if you are wondering why this is important, in particular, I'll draw your attention to a survey of 125 North American service firms that we conducted in May of 2020. And the question that we asked was, what percentage of your clients receive personal outreach from partners? And almost 16, or only 16% of the firms were able to say, oh, almost all of our clients, even those who we don't have an active project with, but like former clients too, we reached out to all of them and we said, how are things going with COVID? How are you doing? How can we help? 25% said, well, about 2/3 of our clients we did that with. And 18% said only about 1/3 of our clients. 41% couldn't even answer the question, because they're not keeping tabs on whether their seller doers are even managing those key relationships. So firms struggle to maintain a short, manageable list of key clients, prospects, and referral sources so that those important relationships are top of mind and client outreach is managed. I'm not talking about the CRM marketing function right now. Obviously, you're using that, you're automating a lot of that, and you're sending those blasts out broadly. I'm talking about and they're not necessarily managed particularly well because the seller doers don't have that skill set or don't have that infrastructure. If this is something that is a challenge for you, there's a tool called Practice Pipeline. It helps seller doers organize and maintain and manage key relationships. It provides suggestions on how to advance opportunities. So if they do get stuck with, I'm not sure how to reach out, it tells them what to do. It sends alerts on business development opportunities that require attention. It's fallen through the cracks. You haven't reached out to so-and-so in 6 months. It's time to do that. And it integrates with CRM and Outlook. So if this has piqued your interest and you're interested in learning more, Matthew, if you want to launch that poll, we'll find out if anyone would like some more information on that. We can reach out and give you some additional opportunities to learn about Practice Pipeline.
Great, and we're launching that poll now.
Yeah, and for those of you who have never heard of Practice Pipeline, it was new to me as well. But I have seen the interface, and I will say what I really like about it is how intuitive and how user-friendly it is, right? So if you're on the go, like I am every day, chasing the next opportunity, identifying the next client, I've found that this is like a really user-friendly tool, and it speaks to an efficiency that I've never seen before. So yeah, it's a great platform to have.
Great, and we're about 45 seconds in, and right now we'll close the poll and go over the results. Like 69% said yes, 31 said no.
Very good. Well, we'll be in touch with those of you who said yes, and thank you for your interest. Look for an email from us in the next day or so. So we want to talk a little bit about one more concept here that I think you'll find valuable as you're looking at business development during this very unusual time, which is that this is a time, we talk about value, we talk about being, specific, we talk about the danger of being tone deaf. This is a time to really look at how you can be helpful for other people. And that's a business development strategy, as well as it is just a way to fulfill your own impetus to want to be community minded. So one of the ways to do that, if you're looking for, what's another way that I can follow up that might be a little bit more formal than some of the other things that have been suggested, you can always ask your key clients or contacts what they are doing personally or professionally to help those in need during this time. If they're part of a large organization, they may very well have some sort of initiative, a committee, a task force, or some other community-facing initiative that's oriented toward helping people. It might not even be COVID related, but many have formed or are in the process of forming new initiatives that will enable them to be helpful during this time. So those who maybe don't have something in mind but would like to get more involved, you can connect those people to the people who do have a specific charity group or they sit on a board of directors that's doing something right now. And in that way, you not only play matchmaker, but you also get involved in that yourself. And that's a fantastic project. We're all looking for a project to work on right now, right? Well, have that be your project, because there is perhaps less abundance of projects that you might have worked on 6 months ago in your space. But there's a real abundance of projects that we could all be working on to help those in need during this time. One of the examples that was on the earlier list that was showed was making COVID masks together, right? Like homemade COVID masks. You can just Google that, find out how to make COVID masks. You can have a virtual COVID mask making party, and then you can donate those COVID masks to people who are in need. that's a fantastic way to, again, get together, be social, but do something that really makes you feel like you're helping to make a difference. Dianne, anything you want to share with this?
No, I think we're running out of time a little bit, so I want to make sure we get through our presentation for some Q&A.
All right,
Yeah.
well then let's review our takeaways.
Yeah, so as we conclude this webinar, David and I would like to share, as we mentioned earlier, 6 key takeaways with you. And I think the biggest misconception right now is that we should wait to get back to normal so that we can go back to doing business development the way it was done before. Now, how many of you are currently in this predicament? I hope you're not, but I'm sure it's happening. So where your principals or your leadership team is just waiting for the virus to disappear or waiting for a vaccine to appear so we can get back to conferences and our typical networking events. You know, David and I both agree that that is probably not the best strategy and approach to business development with everything that's going on right now. So our recommendation is to not retreat. If anything else, what the client survey has shown us is that our clients want us to stay in touch, and they want us to continue sharing valuable and pertinent information. And along with that point, I want to emphasize quality over quantity. Really understand what your clients' concerns are and try to address those concerns by providing valuable and applicable solutions. If I were you, I'd be leaning on my technical team now more than ever to really hone in on how your firm can provide those sound solutions to those clients' projects and their issues.
One of the ways that you can make sure that your messaging has quality over quantity is keeping the 4 reductions in mind as you create content and as you deliver messaging. Remember, those 4 reductions are reducing expense, reducing stress, reducing risk, and reducing inefficiency.
And with that, you know, BD 101, right? Out of sight, out of mind. I mean, keep in mind that the research has indicated that you have to have at least 5 interactions or touch points with an individual for them to really remember you and the conversation that you guys have had. So in lieu of in-person events, start networking virtually, please. I mean, David provided a lot of creative recommendations and suggestions as to how we can do that. And I want to encourage all of you to think outside of the box.
As you're thinking outside the box, think about social activities, maybe some things you haven't tried before. That'll help you get to number 5 and beyond much more easily, and do something good together. Take this opportunity to reach out to folks who might be feeling like they're not sure how they can be of help. It's likely to be a common sentiment and one that you can use to connect to the people in your network. So with that, questions from the audience that Dianne and I might be able to address in our final minutes here.
Great. So we'll allow all the attendees, if you have questions, please feel free to include them in the question area on the GoToWebinar platform. But during the presentation, we did have a few come through. So circling back to the beginning of the program, Dianne, I believe you mentioned a survey that you sent to your clients. There was a question: was there any incentive for your clients to fill out this survey?
That's a great question. Thank you, Matthew. So honestly, I didn't even think of that. I mean, I was self-isolating for 9 weeks and it was driving me crazy. And so I thought, I'm just going to take the initiative to issue this survey. And I have to tell you, 80% of the clients responded within the first 2 days. I didn't even have to bribe them with golf. So it actually worked out in my favor, but thank you for asking the question.
I would add one thing to that. If you're looking to launch this on a broader, more formal basis, you will find that if you just send out, a survey online, you're going to get very little response. Generally, the response rates to those surveys are 15% if you're lucky. So I think, again, it comes back to list segmentation. If offering them a $5 Starbucks card for their response is in your budget and that's something that you want to do, you can reserve that for the more high value contacts. Everybody else can just get the regular survey, and you sort of roll the dice on whether or not they respond. You may also want to segment in terms of which of those people are going to get a phone call versus an email survey. The phone call is much more likely to get more meaningful response from them. And the other thing that I would say is, don't just assume that they're not going to be responsive. If your messaging is our communication is really important, and the way that we communicate with you and making sure that our communication is high value to you is important, people will recognize that, wow, there's something in it for me to respond to this survey, because they are looking out for me. They did bother to ask. So positioning will really help incentivize people to respond, and will optimize your response rates.
Yeah, I think it depends on also the demographic that you want to reach out to. Are you hoping to initiate a survey for 200 people? Like in my case, I knew these clients individually, right? So which is why I had a more targeted approach to 50.
Great, we had a few more come through. So another question we had is, what tips for non-technical business development people, or what tips do you offer for non-technical business development people who cannot necessarily offer technical assistance to clients?
Yeah, so a majority, I'm assuming that question is directed to me. So, I am not an engineer or architect, but I do know a lot of them within my firm. And so when a client poses a technical question, I may not have the response right away, but I am damn sure that I will get the best technical project or construction manager to help me provide the client with the appropriate response in an expedient manner. Right. So that's another thing that I really focus in on, is not only giving them the information, but giving it to them faster than anybody else can do it. So hopefully that answers the question.
And the one thing I would add to that is, technical business developers have the benefit of being able to answer more detailed technical questions as the business development conversation goes in that direction, whereas non-technicals, of course, have to hand off. But non-technical business developers tend to have more conducive personalities for that outreach in the first place. So everybody has a strength that they can play to here. And I would say every recommendation, every single recommendation that Dianne and I have shared with you today applies whether you're technical or non-technical in your business development. The key is you've got to get the dialogue going. Once it's going, you can redirect it. But until it's going, you've got nothing.
Great, and we have time for just one more. One question, any suggestions for new firms that are still in need of awareness?
Hire a business developer. No, I guess, ask me the question again, Matthew.
Sure. Do you have any suggestions for new firms that are still in need of awareness?
So I think it helps to have a business developer, because, the business developer can help drive the marketing initiative, the brand awareness, the elevated presence in the industry. I think you have to have an individual or a team of people to actually support that effort, to advance your marketing and business development strategies. So, I mean, if you're new in the industry and you're trying to build a brand or establish a presence, I think there's a lot of ways to do that on social media. David, you're an expert in this field.
Yeah, I would say two things. One is you have the advantage of being more nimble than a more established firm. And so look for the weak spots in your competitors, because they can't do as much about that in short order. They have a certain inertia, a certain momentum, and they're just going to continue doing what they've been doing. There are areas where they're going to get lazy, and that gives you an opportunity. So as you look at your competitive intelligence and you see, oh, this one has a kind of an antiquated social media strategy, that's where we want to put our emphasis. Or this other one sends out a lot of generic content. That's where we want to put our emphasis. We are different because when we put thought leadership forward, we do a lot more research, we put a lot more specificity into it. But whatever it is, you want to make sure that you're sending a message that really helps to signal you as being elevated from the competitors who they have the head start, right? So they're always going to have the lead simply by virtue of that. But you can shoot ahead if you take a very keen look at where it is that they have started to take things for granted. The other thing I'll say is that this is a time when business development is particularly challenging, as Dianne and I have shared with you, and where creative business development will not necessarily be adopted as much as it should be in order for people to take full advantage of their relationships. That is also your opportunity if you're willing to be creative and proactive, because I guarantee you 80% of the people on today's program are going to walk away going, wow, that was really helpful. And those were some great ideas, but they won't necessarily implement anything for the next 2 months. Why? Because they already have a full plate with a bunch of other great ideas that they've been trying to, work their way through. If you can be nimble and you can seize the opportunity to be first to start to launch your virtual happy hour poker game, town hall, whatever it is that you think is going to help to, again, differentiate you from that perspective, then you snatch that gold ring first.
Yeah, and I will say that, being dormant is not an option. Yeah, it just isn't.
Great. Well, Dianne, David, do you have any additional comments before we wrap up the session today?
No, we want to thank SMPS HQ for the opportunity to present. David and I had a lot of fun putting our presentation together. We hope that everyone saw value in the conversation and in the information that we provided. So I just want to say thank you, Matthew, and to Marcy as well for coordinating all this and for ensuring that as an industry that we have a platform to continue moving forward safer and in a more successful manner.
I echo Dianne's sentiments. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, SMPS.
Well, on behalf of SMPS, thank you to our presenters, Dianne Lee and David Ackert, and to all of today's participants. Following today's meetup, you will receive a link to complete a brief survey of today's session. Your feedback is very important to us as we plan future programs. Thank you again for joining us. You may now disconnect.